Aside from the Bretton Woods system, we also have another economic system referred as the neoliberalism, which we will be learning in this video. How neoliberalism emerged as an economic system. Neoliberalism is believed to have succeeded the Bretton Woods system, which was established on the principles of global Keynesianism. As you can see on your left, we have here the scenic Bretton Woods, where policymakers established the contours of modern global economics. During the Policymakers' Assembly in the Bretton Woods, the policymakers utilized the ideas and principles introduced by John Maynard Keynes, which was later known as the global Keynesianism. The high point of global Keynesianism came in the mid 1940s to the early 1970s. During this period, governments poured money into their economies, allowing people to purchase more goods and, in the process, increase demand for these products. As demand increased, so did the prices of these goods. Western and some Asian economies like Japan accepted this rise in prices because it was accompanied by general economic growth and reduced unemployment. The theory went that as prices increased, companies would earn more and would have more money to hire workers. Keynesian economists believed that all this was a necessary trade off for economic development. In the early 1970s, however, the prices of oil rose sharply as a result of the imposition of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries of the oil embargo. This is in response to the decision of the United States and other countries to resupply the Israeli military with the needed arms during the Yom Kippur War, also known as Arab-Israeli War, October War, or Ramadan War. Arab countries also used the embargo to stabilize their economies and growth. The oil embargo affected the Western economies that were reliant on oil. To make matters worse, the stock markets crashed in 1973 to 1974 after the United States stopped linking the dollar to gold. The result was a phenomenon that Keynesian economics could not have predicted, a phenomenon called stagflation, a combination of stagnation and inflation. In stagflation, it is in which a decline in economic growth and employment, which is stagnation, takes place alongside a sharp increase in prices or inflation. Around this time, a new form of economic thinking was beginning to challenge the Keynesian orthodoxy. Economists such as Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman argued that the government's practice of pouring money into their economies had caused inflation by increasing demand for goods without necessarily increasing supply. More profoundly, they argued that government intervention in economies distort the proper functioning of the market. Economists like Friedman used the economic turmoil to challenge the consensus around Keynes' ideas. What emerged was a new form of economic thinking that critics labeled neoliberalism. From the 1980s onward, neoliberalism became the codified strategy of the United States Treasury Department, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and eventually the World Trade Organization, which is a new organization founded in 1995 to continue the tariff reduction under GATT. The policies they forwarded came to be called the Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus dominated global economic policies from the 1980s until the early 2000s. Its advocates pushed for minimal government spending to reduce government debt. They also called for the privatization of government controlled services like water, power, communications, and transport, believing that the free market can produce the best results. Finally, they pressured governments, particularly in the developing world, to reduce tariffs and open up their economies, arguing that it is the quickest way to progress. Advocates of the Washington Consensus conceded that, along the way, certain industries would be affected and die, but they considered this shock therapy necessary for long term economic growth. Despite the initial success of neoliberal politicians like the Prime Minister in the Britain, Margaret Thatcher, and US President Ronald Reagan, the defects of the Washington Consensus became immediately palpable. A good early example is that of the post communist Russia. After communism had collapsed in the 1990s, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, called for the immediate privatization of all government industries. The IMF assumed that such a move would free these countries or industries from corrupt bureaucrats and pass them on to the more dynamic and independent private investors. What happened, however, was that only individuals and groups who had accumulated wealth under the previous communist order had the money to purchase these industries. In some cases, the economic elites relied on easy access to government funds to take over the industries. This practice has entrenched an oligarchy that still dominates the Russian economy to this very day.